I believe in the power of love, love of God, and love of people, and I believe that that power can influence the future.
I believe in the work of making love.
When I was a little boy, I had a belief and a fantasy that the greatest thing in the whole world, especially about marriage, would be to kneel with your wife in the evening and thank God for each other and for whatever he had given you. That was my dream as a little boy, and it never came true as God would have it. But I did in 1961, as I was finishing seminary, I did run across a book called Head of the Family, written by Clayton Barbeau, that was about a husband and wife and a family who could and did do just that kind of thing. And it's a great joy and privilege to have Clayton and Myra Barbeau with us as guests on I Believe. We'll be right back with you in a minute.
If only you believe like I believe, baby, like I believe, we get by.
I want to pick up, Myra, on your comment, but not be, I know it was said in jest. Myra said, just as we were leaving you all, that books are all theory. And Head of the Family and many of the other books that Clay Barbeau has written, and you two have written and edited together, need not resemble the truth. I think better they do. I think we can't help revealing ourselves in what we write and say. But I wonder if sometimes writing about something as intimate as a marriage can't turn out to be, well, either a real inspiration or a kind of weapon. Hey, you said in chapter 4, but you didn't live up to it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We do that all the time. Even in the middle of, Clayton just finished another book, and I'm in the middle of typing it when he began hassling me. And I'm running around the kitchen while he's hassling me.
Read page 35.
I just typed that. I just typed that. You can't do that. Not a weapon quite, let's say a means of persuasion.
Yeah. What is it largely autobiographical? What you write and what you've done novels and so forth as well, but they say that we write ourselves. And the marriage you're expressing is your own. You've only had one. How limited can you be?
Right.
One marriage, 23 years, 8 children later.
We're still creating that one.
That's right. It's not finished.
It's a lifetime task, creating a marriage, and it would be impossible to try to create more than one.
What's the hardest thing and the best thing about marriage as you see it? And you're supposed to be authorities on marriage and Christian marriage in particular.
Please don't say that. I hate that word authority.
It's as bad as the
That's
word,
the hardest thing. And what's the best thing?
It's as bad as the word expert in regard to marriage and family life. I get called that often, and especially when I go to speak somewhere.
Anywhere outside of your own town, you're an expert.
That's the way I put it down. I usually say the only thing I know about an expert is he's a man from out of town with a beard that you pay a lot of money to listen to. And I mean that, especially in the areas of love, sex, and marriage. I think we've been experted to death in those areas, and literally certain aspects of marriage and family life have definitely suffered almost fatal blows from over-expertise, people listening to outside experts rather than paying attention to their own authentic selves, paying attention to their own unique relationships with their wives, their children, their husbands, etc. I really, I hope that a healthier era is setting in.
Well, you know, the whole premise of this program is that people don't remember ideas anyway, particularly ideas that they read in books. They remember people. Kids don't do what their parents say, they do what their parents do.
That's
all the important life lessons, including love, are learned in the doing, in the example. So I'd much rather have you share yourselves and your marriage. And I would say I am most impressed, obviously, by the spirituality of your union. We've had I Believe for 2 years, and it's very difficult to just be right up front about the presence of God in your life. I don't know, people are running from him, or they haven't found him yet, or he's institutionalized and they think identifying with him is a kind of churchy, anachronistic
That's
old
right.
age.
It's not right there in your daily
life. But it's very much part for the two of you. You seem very comfortable with it. Why don't we start there? Would you talk about the role of God in your lives, in your marriage, in your family?
Sure.
Myra?
I think it's very hard to communicate to children. I find it not always easy to communicate in words, but I really believe that you do communicate in the way you live. I really very much want to, bring my children up as caring human beings, caring about themselves and about the people that they come in contact and the world at large. I think that's really important. Mm-hmm. And I really do believe that the best way that I can do that is to be that kind of person myself. And I think that's probably the hardest thing in life, is to become mm-hmm. what you want to be yourself.
Well, you don't have to have a religion now to care about other people.
But it has to have a motive. There has to be a motive why you care. Mm-hmm. And I think you have to start with yourself, why you care about yourself. And for me, the most important thing is that I'm God's child. And I try to communicate that to my children, that, I love them, good, bad, naughty, wretched, brats, whatever it is. I still love them, and that's really just a mirror of the way God loves them, that they're really valuable because, God loves them. And the gospel tells us the hairs of our head are numbered. And I hope I am communicating that to my children, that they're that valuable in God's sight, and that's why it's important. I don't know how well, I don't think you ever do really know how well. You just hope.
I just got the most beautiful letter from a mother of 7 who said her children are almost all grown now, and they have left the faith. She tried desperately to raise them as practical, believing, functioning, as we used to say, Christians, and they kind of left. They may be living their own spirituality, but they're not practicing the faith as she taught it to them. And she said, this may be a very humbling thing for me. She said, faith is a grace gift from Almighty God, and I wanted to give it to him, and I couldn't, or I don't think I have. Maybe God held back that grace, that gift for himself. I don't know, Clay, what do you think?
Well, the crisis of faith for an adolescent is a moment of tremendous growth. I think if one hasn't doubted the faith, and one hasn't really tested it, and it hasn't grown to an adult level, but I think the panic we parents experience when children go through that sort of breaking away, panic I surely experienced at first, and had to see that what was really troubling me was not that they were losing the faith, but that they were challenging mine, that they were losing my faith. My kids are losing my faith, sort of attitude, you see, and how can they do this to me, But when you began to look upon it with the more truly Christian perspective, in other words, that God writes straight with crooked lines, and that each individual has to work out his own destiny under grace, mm-hmm. and is really free and responsible for themselves, ultimately, for their own creation. Then, and especially when I look at my own history, you see, I was away from the faith from the time I was 12 until the time I was 24. In fact, the major problem Myra had in getting married to me was, could she marry a non-Christian, and especially one who wrote her letters from Korea saying, how can you bother to worship with a bunch of psom-brain jackasses with YMCA smiles? That sort
Tactful
of thing.
He always was.
You see, I met Myra one day. I told her the next day why I couldn't marry her. She said, I haven't proposed. I said, but sweet, I'm heading you off the pass. I don't believe in games. If I proposed to you now, you'd say yes, wouldn't you? And she said yes. And I said, you see what a favor I'm doing, telling you that I'm not about to marry you. And the next day I changed my mind, and then I volunteered for Korea and went away for 10 months to think it over. Because I was really a very full-fledged member of the Bohemian mystique, having lived on the left bank and so on. I believed that an artist couldn't marry. Marriage was death for a writer. I lost most of my Bohemian friends the moment I got married. In those days, that was bad news.
Yeah.
And but within a year, she had taught me I didn't know anything about the faith, and I had, gotten her around to other things.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of people dumped on...
God writes straight with crooked lines.
And people threw out a faith that wasn't the true faith.
Oh, and my
major
obstacle to Christianity was all those Christians I knew, especially my relatives, my older brothers and the others who were beating me up regularly to get me to go to church. You know, wonderful, in the name of God.
You will go.
You know, which I think helps one to become non-judgmental when one does finally discover the scriptures and a few things like that.
We all had crusades.
Yeah.
I want to ask a toughie, because a lot of whatever these things, these polls, these census things that they conduct all the time, but the most recent about the dropout in the church, apparently most of organized Christianity and Roman Catholicism, the memberships dropped out, and the major reason for the large dropout is the church's stance on birth control. I don't know if that's a cop-out in itself when people say that, but the church did take a stand. And I would like to ask how you handle that particular situation, or how you handle the church and church directives and incorporate these into your marriage, into your spirituality. Myra?
Well, I mean, it may be a major reason for people leaving the church. I don't happen to know anybody who has left the church over that reason. And
why, really?
No, and it isn't a very important reason for us.
Well, there are three given: that, the changes in the liturgy, and the church's stance on divorce.
Yeah.
Those are supposed to be the three main.
And for me, the most important thing is that I see where we're failing is that we're not relevant to what's real about life. And I think that's where we're losing our young people, is that we're not relevant to life. You know, we can go to church and we won't hear a thing about the things that we as Christians should be expressing in our daily lives. It's just totally irrelevant. The sermon could have been written in 1910.
Some of them were.
Yes, I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it. And being brought up perhaps in a more traditional way, we sit there for it because maybe we have some sense of spirituality. But young people won't do that, and I really don't blame them. You know, so I think it's as far as the young people is concerned, I don't think that's ever going to, that generation, either divorce or birth control are going to be that's not a stumbling block.
How do you feel? I want to ask something. I'm thinking again of Head of the Family, Clayton's bestseller, and the chapter on Father as Priest was the one that moved me most, I think, at the time as a young seminarian. I remember the business of blessing your children in the evening. I'm wondering if this is a way in which to make religion, if you will, spirituality relevant, meaningful, to integrate that into everyday lives, into families.
It was mentioned in the book as one, and it's something we still do, you know, it has, you see, we've lost our sense of ritual in most families. I mean, I don't just mean religious ritual generally. Even the evening meal is no longer what it used to be in the ritualistic sense, or the Sunday dinner in any home in this country years ago was a ritual meal in many ways. You know, chicken every Sunday sort of thing, if it was only that ritual. We've lost that. And to even that little slight thing, such as blessing one's children when they come to say goodnight, and, you know, giving them the paternal blessing or the maternal blessing, lets them know that your relationship is you know, one in God's love too. It also leaves them with your blessing. You know, with your, you know, no matter what's happened during the day, they went to bed with Daddy and Mommy's blessing, you see. And this goes, too, for, you know, when they're going into an operation or whatever. In fact, I find it interesting you should pick up on that, because so many laymen particularly, have mentioned that was a significant point. And I only used it as one example because there were many such things that people could do that they felt were adaptable. I wasn't urging anybody to do that. I simply said one of the little things we do in our home happens to be the inauguration of the priestly blessing, of the lay priesthood, of the Christian here exercising his lay priesthood and blessing his own children.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you know, when I feel like it, I say, now give me your blessing, and ask the children to bless me. because they're equal with me, huh?
Sure.
I mean, they're equal as persons, and their blessing counts too. And so, you know, if we bless one another, it mends any wounds that have been delivered during the day a little bit, huh?
I like that.
Yeah. And I think if we could restore some of that sense of ritual, which I feel, you know, we used to be a little, I used to be a little more rigid about some of our rituals. I was, for a man who believed in freedom for the individual, I was very deterministic when it came to the older children in our family. People used to say, how do you get them to bed at, you know, 8:30 every evening? I'd say they have no choice. I'm bigger than they are, you know. But there was also a sort of treadmill thing. After dinner, there was the story, you see, and after the story there was, or they got in their pajamas for the story, which they wanted, and after the story they had the prayers, which they went to because, well, after the prayers there was the blessing, and that was okay because after the blessing they got the piggyback ride, which deposited them right in bed, out of which there was no return. You know, it was sort of a treadmill approach. Yeah. So I contended that I, you know, theoretically was a freedomist and sort of, in practice, very much a determinist with regard to that. But that's loosened up. I've learned a lot. I've told my eldest son that I made all my mistakes on him. And he's forgiven me, and I think he's forgiven me. I get that impression at any rate. And the younger children have a lot more freedom in that regard than they had.
I know a father of a family, Clay, who can't spend very much time with his children, and so he makes sure that he gives each one of his children a 5-minute back rub every night. He has 7 before they go to sleep, and I think that may be a blessing of sorts.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
You have the opportunity of living.
Many fathers are out of, just put it that way, out of touch with their children. Here's one who makes sure he's 5 minutes, literally, physically, in touch.
Yeah. Which is also time to talk. How did your day go?
Yes,
listen, you live at home because you're a writer and a lecturer and so forth, and that has real advantages in today's world.
And disadvantages.
And disadvantages.
Ask my wife. From her point of view, I'm underfoot.
I'm sure, what, would you like him to commute to Chicago?
When one of my kids, when Michael was the oldest boy, when he was about 7, and one of his playmates, he came home one day and he said, do you know that Jerry's father, that every morning he gets up and he goes out and they don't see him until 6 o'clock every evening? You know, he found this just amazing that kid's father wasn't home all day, you know. And we had to sort of acclimate him to the fact that I was the oddity, in a sense, rather than the other boy's father. But I think from one viewpoint, the kids have 2 bosses around, which is a disadvantage.
Yeah, that's probably been one of the hardest things. But it's been one of the hardest things to come to a balance about. I think having him home all the time, it's difficult.
We've come to a balance. I try to keep my mouth shut.
No, I don't. I think we're still working at it.
How do you fight creatively? You work, you talk.
I hit a lot.
Oh, she's great at that. She hits.
I really believe in getting it all out.
Physical.
Every way. I yell, I hit, I stamp, I scream.
I'm a real male chauvinist in that sense. I was taught not to hit a lady.
So that's unfair. You have an advantage.
So I don't often hit back except verbally, but I won't plug my next book directly, but I have a chapter called Creative Conflict because so many people don't use their conflict creatively. I think that
well, it's creative marriage, the middle years. Isn't that what it's going to be called?
Yeah, it's going to be called that because you see, what I meant earlier when I said I believe in the work of making love, I didn't call it a job. But I consider our life's work the work of creating love in the world, in ourselves, in other people, between ourselves and other people, in the world. That's a lifetime task, the task of making more love out of the stuff around us. And so that book is for the people whose marriages are plateauing out, whose marriages are at the age level ours is. We've been married 23 years this year. Many people married 15 years or more find that they've routinized their arguments. They have the same argument for the last 15 years. You know, they know one another's lines and they know how it's going to end and it never solves anything. Or they've reached a state of never arguing, but therefore never communicating, and so on. And I, in this book, tried to show how to put new energies into and how to face up to conflict and use it creatively, how to even stimulate conflict in order to use it. But also I have other things in it. Well, now, I don't think we've ever had that problem. Myra's very upfront. and has educated me a lot in that whole area.
Oh, I think we have had those problems, but we were, you know,
I see. I don't
they
think...
go up and down. I mean, sometimes
Well,
I
didn't
feel
mean
like
to say we've never had conflict problems.
No,
I mean,
but sometimes I feel like I'm not communicating. He is not hearing me, you know.
Yeah.
And we go through a stage where I won't even talk to him for a while until I can get myself together.
But there are times, even with the greatest trust and intimacy, where that's the situation.
That's
isn't it?
right.
It's called life.
Accepting one another as a
That's
package
right.
plan is.
That's
I love
right.
you talk about making love, but also making hope and making time.
That's right.
And making space.
Those are favorite themes of mine.
And also making belief.
Yeah, when I, you know,
Playing together.
there are people who I hear it all the time. We don't have time for one. We don't have time to get alone together. We don't have time to do this. Or the kids are always around. We don't have time. You see, we just simply haven't found the time in the last year to take a weekend off. You've heard that. And I look at them straight in the face usually and say, now I've lived 45 years. I've been around the world a little bit. And I have found a $20 bill on the sidewalk one day. I have stumbled across babies, you know, and so on. But I have never found 20 minutes. And just lying there on the sidewalk. I never stumbled across an hour on my way to work. You know, it just doesn't happen.
Did you ever run across
Time is made. That was my point. And in high school, we used to call it making time when you were enhancing a relationship with a young lady. And my contention was that if you want time for something, you create it. You make it.
That's what I'm going to do right now for just 60 seconds. I'm going to find 60 seconds. No, we're going to make it. We're going to make 60 seconds. And we'll be back in 60 seconds.
Good for you. Fiat.
Getting a word in.
Let's go back to kind of the spiritual. We were talking earlier about the morality of marriage today. There's so many new kinds of marriage, so many new kinds of family. Interesting that the old-timers, Masters and Johnson, would come out and vindicate much of what we would think of, and you as well, as the traditional, you know, the nuclear family, the husband, wife, and children, and say this is kind of it. A lot of this other commitment,
a relationship of fidelity.
Right, and they
We
were
need
talking,
this.
and that was in a book called The Pleasure Bond.
Yeah.
And what they were talking about was strictly functional, you see. Most of the experiments of the past 10, 15 years, based upon the sexual fantasies of various writers in New York and ex-Jesuits. Beware of Jesuits who discover sex at 40, you know.
Such your little menopause.
And they blister one particular ex-Jesuit in that book. These things were not functional. They don't work to the happiness or the increased sexual pleasure of a couple. The only if you
talking about playing around now, or
that whole thing. Masters and Johnson make a point that in all their travels,
Open marriage is supposed to be.
Open marriage, and you know, we don't mean in the communication sense, but in that extramarital.
Yeah.
They've got
Sexual realm.
Yeah, sexual realm. They have
partner
Yes.
trade-outs and
yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
right. You know, we get new, as Carl Menninger points out, we change the words, and therefore we take away, you know, the moral quality of these things. It used to be called adultery. Now we get extramarital or co-marital affairs, and that makes it okay.
Yeah.
It's in a book that Menninger, one of our great psychiatrists, wrote about Whatever Became of Sin.
I know.
A marvelous book,
Yeah.
a beautiful book. It relates that problem. Okay. Their point was it's non-functional. They had never met anybody who went the wife swapping or the open marriage route who lasted more than a year in it without either quitting or getting a divorce. Because usually it was symptomatic of an illness in the relationship. Yeah. And they were malfunctioning in the relationship, and they thought this was going to, you know, help out.
It's an exercise. In
now, in the last few years, you have a number of psychiatrists, whom I quote in my new book, and sociologists pointing out the aberrant effects of this, what neuroses it is based on. They weren't doing that 10 years ago. It was so terribly unpopular. In fact, 4 years ago, I couldn't get my book published because the second chapter was on fidelity. My agent, one of the best in the country, said that she couldn't find a trade book publisher who would handle a book that upheld fidelity.
Are some of these values that,
4 years
in general,
4 years
Okay,
ago.
well,
changed.
it's 76, and we're
Yeah.
talking about marriage and family. Are some of the, what we thought of as traditional values, returning, perhaps in different formats and
Because they're
lifestyles,
functional.
but yeah, because they work.
They work. They work.
Right.
They work. There's no doubt about it.
Why do people fall more in love when they're hurting, when they're suffering, when they're sacrificing together? That seems a rather common phenomenon and a mystery at the same time. Not so much when we're playing together or escaping together, but when we're hurting.
No, I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think perhaps it's only true that we clutch at it more when we're hurting.
It's a thought, Clayton.
Maybe verbalize a little more about it because we all of a sudden know we need something to hang on
No.
to. But I don't know that it's necessarily true that we...
Growth producing. Yeah. that you really
Necessarily,
grow closer.
yeah. I think it is impossible to generalize about love.
If you had, I've only got 30 seconds. If you had one word that you could offer the many people about to be married or having been married for a long time who are listening now, do you have anything
One
like
word?
that to suggest? A word, a hope, a wish, a blessing? You have 9 seconds. 8.
Keep at it. I mean, just keep working at it because the rewards are great.
All right, and I'll give you one too, which is marriage is one's own creation.
Thanks. Thanks for sharing yours. Keep at it. Keep creating. We'll see you next week.
Only you believe like I